This paradise does not run itself. In Switzerland, long before the first passenger train leaves the station perfectly on time, many farmers on the Alpine slopes have already unlatched their barn doors in the freezing dark. While the warm breath of cattle rises, in the frigid morning air, someone in the city is quietly retrieving their clothes from a strictly scheduled shared laundry room. High above them both, a small block of ancient ice fractures and falls away from a silent glacier. This is not just another story. About pristine snow-capped mountains, premium chocolate, or flawless railway networks. This is the raw, unspoken story of how people actually live and work inside a society renowned worldwide for its absolute stability. If you ever wondered how farmers live in paradise, on Europe's most beautiful Alps, the truth is far more complex than a postcard. Behind the effortless image of this alpine heaven lies a completely different reality. It is a delicate system built on heavy, unseen agricultural labor. It is bound by some of the highest living costs on the planet, maintained by rigid community rules, deeply dependent on the silent work of immigrants, and increasingly threatened by an unpredictable, changing climate. Every beautiful meadow and every peaceful Sunday requires a quiet, continuous trade-off. From those who call this place home. And if this perfect life must be maintained every single day, who is truly paying the price to keep it alive? To understand these people, you must first understand the one thing that set every rule for them: the mountains. Look down at Switzerland from above, and you will see how the Alps fracture the country into deep valleys. Lakes and rivers sit between communities that were once entirely cut off from one another by impenetrable rock. Snow, steep inclines, and long winters have always made the movement of people, cattle, and goods incredibly difficult. In this isolation, neighboring villages formed their own distinct dialects, their own customs, and their own rhythm of life. Now, look closer. A narrow, winding road leads up to a solitary farm. A heavy truck carrying livestock feed carefully navigates a dangerous slope. A farmer studies the shifting clouds before deciding whether to lead the herd to the high pastures. Down below, children wait in the freezing cold for a perfectly timed bus or train to take them across the valley to school. The Swiss did not become highly organized simply because they love precision. The geography demanded it. The terrain forced them to prepare months in advance for the long winter, to meticulously stockpile food, to share narrow mountain roads, and to carefully manage communal water sources. They had to coordinate their schedules and build deep trust between communities that were naturally divided. The mountain does not care who lives below it. It only creates the slope, the harsh winter, and the vast distance. Humans had to figure out how to survive it together. In an era where most of us can buy almost anything at any moment, it is hard to remember that there were once communities that had to spend their entire summer preparing just to survive the winter. But at this altitude, human calendars only matter when nature agrees. When spring arrives, the melting snow finally opens the hidden paths to the high pastures. Barns are repaired, fences are mended, and farmers carefully inspect the mountain water lines. By summer, the cattle are led up to the Alpine meadows. This fresh, wild grass becomes the foundation for the milk and the cheese. For the people here, summer is not a vacation season for tourists. It is the most grueling, longest working period of the year. Then comes autumn. The herds return to the valleys. While the festive descent of the cattle attracts heavy crowds, its true purpose remains survival. Every ounce of winter feed must be prepared. In winter, the cattle retreat into the barns. Stored food becomes the absolute deciding factor of life, while the community fights to keep roads, power, and water running through the relentless snow. But there is a silent presence watching over these seasons. The glaciers. Look at the vast expanse of ancient ice. Now look closer, at a single drop of water falling onto a bare stone. Follow that water down to the trough where the cattle drink, and to the farmer kneeling to check the soil. The glacier is not just a scenic backdrop. It holds the water. It controls the rivers. It is the physical memory of all past winters, and right now, it is rapidly shrinking, signaling a deeply unpredictable future for these mountains. Many of us remember the weather through the bright summers of our childhood and the winters that reliably returned every year. But what happens when that precious memory no longer helps a community prepare for the next year? To survive these constantly changing seasons, these isolated valleys had to learn another vital skill: how to negotiate with each other. For centuries, these isolated valleys existed as entirely separate worlds. Each pocket of land formed its own distinct dialect, unique customs, and a fierce sense of local autonomy. When they eventually came together to survive against outside forces, these deeply proud communities did not simply melt into one homogeneous nation. Instead, they learned to coexist through a complex web of early alliances, direct democracy, and mutual agreements. They navigated deep religious divides and maintained a strict policy of neutrality, slowly building a shared national identity across multiple linguistic borders. Watch a commuter train as it leaves a German-speaking village and smoothly glides into a French-speaking station. Listen closely to the routine announcements echoing gracefully in multiple languages. You will see entirely different cultures effortlessly relying on the exact same infrastructure every single day. Swiss identity was not created because everyone is the same. It was forged because millions of people accepted that being deeply different does not have to result in division. This historical necessity to compromise echoes everywhere today. We can zoom down from the grand federal halls to a quiet local town meeting, to a neighborhood club gathering, to a small rule board hanging in an apartment hallway, or to a strict schedule pinned inside a shared laundry room. The exact same principle governs every single level of this modern society. Living together in a confined space requires clear agreements, immense discipline, and the willingness to respect them. But all of those carefully negotiated agreements, unwritten rules, and historic compromises only truly matter when they step into the freezing and unforgiving reality of an ordinary working day. A heavy, calloused hand unlatches the thick wooden door. Warm air escapes from the cold, dimly lit barn. The sharp, metallic clank of a bucket hits the concrete floor. The herd slowly begins to move, their bells softly echoing in the confined space. On a wooden bench nearby, a cup of coffee has already gone cold. The work has begun. Before the sun even touches the peaks, the milking machines are meticulously attached. The milk is swiftly drawn, filtered, and immediately cooled in insulated stainless steel tanks to preserve its purity. The farmers diligently clear the stalls, distribute fresh hay, and carefully check the physical health of every single animal under their care. Hours later, as tourists finally open their hotel windows to admire the majestic Alpine view, the heavy lifting is already over. The raw milk has been collected. The steep access roads have been thoroughly inspected. The first grueling shift of the day is completely finished. The local transport vehicles have already begun their daily routes. This is the ultimate contrast of the Alps, the breathtaking, effortless paradise the world sees, and the relentless, unseen physical labor required to artificially maintain it. Follow a single drop of that morning milk. It begins as wild alpine grass, digested by the cattle, extracted, and instantly cooled. A local cooperative truck winds its way up the mountain to collect it, transporting it safely down to a village processing facility. There, it is carefully transformed into heavy wheels of rich cheese. It ages patiently on wooden shelves before being transported down the valley, eventually arriving on a fine dining table in a distant city, or served on a rustic wooden platter for a visiting tourist. From a single blade of grass, we zoom out to a hard-working family, a loyal cooperative network, a complex transit system, a demanding global market, and a fiercely protected national identity. But a farmer's day does not end with the morning milk. Throughout the long afternoon, steep protective fences must be repaired. The crucial winter hay is cut, turned, and baled before the weather changes. Heavy farm machinery requires constant, meticulous maintenance. This is rarely the isolated job of just one person. The entire family functions as an integrated labor system. The elderly still contribute to the daily chores, while young children assist before or after their long journey to school. If a family member unexpectedly falls ill, the fragile rhythm breaks, often requiring emergency substitute labor from the local community, just to keep the farm fully functioning. Amidst this endless cycle, there are profoundly quiet, ordinary moments. First, the washing of the equipment. There is no sweeping mountain view here, only cold water, shining metal, and a necessary task that must be flawlessly cleaned every single day. Second, the midday meal. A simple, quiet spread of dark bread, hard cheese, and hot coffee rests on a worn wooden table, eaten by hands still bearing the deep traces of morning soil. Finally, the closing of the barn at night. A final, silent check of the resting animals. The lights are switched off. The heavy door is locked. The rhythmic clanking of the cowbells slowly settles, and the great mountain returns to absolute silence. We usually know the exact financial price of a meal, but we rarely realize how many hardened hands, how many steep, dangerous mountain roads, and how many freezing, pitch-black mornings it actually took for that food to finally appear right in front of us. Every single bite represents an immense chain of invisible dedication and endurance. Yet, as the modern economic world rapidly shifts below them, a quiet, lingering question remains. Is a single day of exhausting physical labor still enough to keep a family on the mountain, or has the cost of this perfect life simply become too high? If you follow the flow of money from a simple agricultural product, you will see how this isolated society truly operates. A consumer pays for a premium piece of Alpine cheese at a modern city supermarket. The retail store, the regional distributor, and the village processing facility all take their necessary, calculated share of the profit. Only a small, hard-earned fraction of that final price travels back up the steep mountain to the farm. From that remaining income, the working family must carefully budget and pay for essential winter feed, specialized Alpine machinery, electricity, expensive fuel, routine mechanical maintenance, veterinary care, mandatory health insurance, paid seasonal labor, and increasingly complex transport costs. To survive these brutal financial margins, the mountain economy relies heavily on deep, structured interdependence. Farmers often co-own the local cheese dairy to ensure fair market access. They frequently share heavy, expensive harvesting equipment that no single family could ever afford alone. If a farmer is suddenly injured, regional agricultural networks quickly dispatch substitute workers to ensure the herd does not suffer. However, this is not a romanticized, flawless utopia where neighbors endlessly sacrifice everything for one another. It is a highly practical, tightly organized system of survival, built entirely on mutual economic necessity rather than just pure sentiment. To balance their fragile budgets, many isolated farms now turn directly to the outside world. They sell their products directly to passing visitors, open rustic guest rooms, or transform their daily agricultural chores into agritourism experiences. But this creates a very difficult paradox. Tourism brings vital income that helps rural families stay, yet it simultaneously drives up the local cost of housing, land, and daily services. Authentic Alpine traditions provide crucial revenue, but face the constant, quiet danger of being permanently turned into rehearsed theatrical performances for watching crowds. This delicate local balance is quietly tied to the broader national economy. It relies on a highly respected vocational apprenticeship system, incredibly precise transportation, and small, family-owned regional enterprises that meticulously service specialized mountain needs. It is a strange, grounding reality. A hard-working person can live completely surrounded by a breathtaking landscape that the entire world calls an absolute paradise, yet still lie awake at night, calculating whether they can actually afford a replacement tractor. They wonder if their children will even want to inherit this grueling, physically demanding profession. They constantly question whether their family can truly afford to stay on this beautiful mountain for just one more generation. But ultimately, money is not the only thing that keeps a fragile community alive. There are things much smaller, more repetitive, and much harder to measure. Zoom down from the wealth of one of the world's richest nations into a simple, perfectly maintained, shared laundry room. A resident glances at their watch, retrieving their clothes exactly on time. They quietly wipe down the surface of the machine, leaving the space completely clean for the next person. True civilization is sometimes not found in towering modern architecture. It is found in the simple, quiet way a person chooses to leave a room for a stranger. Perhaps what surprises us most is not that they have so many strict rules, but that they still fundamentally believe a shared public space can actually survive, as long as everyone is willing to step back just a little bit. Then comes Sunday. The busy streets physically slow down. The relentless noise of heavy machinery fades away. Families walk quietly along the mountain paths. An elderly person sits silently by a window. The deep sound of a church bell travels across the residential roofs. For a hard-working family, this is a profound, necessary rest. But for someone living completely alone, that exact same quietness can feel incredibly heavy. In our modern cities, true silence usually only arrives when the night is very late. We have become so deeply accustomed to the endless, chaotic noise of industrial life that we have almost entirely forgotten what it looks like when an entire community decides to rest together. Inside the homes, a shared evening dinner begins. There is no lavish feast, just aged Alpine cheese, fresh weekend bread, and a warm pot of fondue resting firmly in the center of the wooden table. Everyone must patiently wait for each other. They must share from the exact same center, intentionally slowing down the frantic pace of life. Outside, local choirs and village walking clubs gather. For any newcomer, these clubs are not just casual hobbies, they are a vital doorway. A person does not just need a physical address. They need a place where others genuinely notice their presence, and more importantly, notice their absence. But in an increasingly international society, not everyone who lives here can easily step into that protective circle. Follow a morning passenger train descending from a high Alpine village into the city below. Inside a single rail car, multiple languages quietly blend. Young students travel outward to universities and vocational schools. Essential workers commute down to the deep valleys, while eager tourists travel up. Goods and vital services constantly move in opposite directions. The railway does not simply connect geographical locations. It physically connects entirely different worlds. For the youth, this train represents a highly complex choice. Not everyone abandons the mountains. Many leave to learn specialized trades, weighing the pull of their family heritage against the harsh reality of rural housing costs and limited local incomes. They wonder if they can ever afford to return home. For the immigrant workforce, the train is a daily routine. They are the unseen backbone of this paradise, operating the hotels, harvesting the fields, and caring for the elderly. They learn the demanding work procedures incredibly fast, but stepping into the deep social fabric of an ancient village takes much longer. At some level, we all know that quiet, lingering feeling. The feeling of standing in a crowded room but not truly belonging to it. Of living surrounded by people, yet wondering if anyone would actually notice if you were absent one day. It leaves us all with a very difficult question. How fast can a national economy open up compared to the slow, cautious heart of an isolated community? And as living costs, mass tourism, and the climate all rapidly change together, the silent, growing gap between being allowed to live in paradise and truly belonging to it begins to widen. This is truly a remarkably wealthy nation, yet the majority of its households rent their homes. High rental prices and mandatory monthly insurance premiums create immense pressure, even for those with a stable, respectable income. In tourist-heavy regions, the surging demand for vacation homes constantly drives up local real estate, forcing ordinary residents into a relentless financial balancing act. Renting here does not mean poverty, but it demands an absolute, unbreakable financial discipline. That same discipline governs their behavior. The unspoken standards of being perfectly punctual, impeccably clean, highly efficient, and never becoming a public nuisance create a deeply functioning society. It builds absolute, unwavering trust. But it also constantly creates a heavy, invisible pressure, a lingering feeling of constantly being evaluated by those around you. This pressure extends to their very identity. The festive descent of the cattle, the wooden chalets, the heavy cowbells, and the pristine villages are genuine daily realities. Yet, they are also heavily marketed global products. It forces a complex question. Are the locals simply preserving their ancient traditions, or are they now performing them just to secure enough income to keep their fragile community alive? But the most uncontrollable pressure comes from above. The snow seasons are rapidly shifting. Bare, jagged rocks are suddenly exposing themselves. Industries dependent on deep winter snow are desperately adapting, and agriculture faces a dangerously unpredictable natural calendar. The station clocks still tick perfectly, and the trains arrive exactly on the minute, but the ancient ice continues to quietly melt away. These massive rivers of ice have existed longer than any stone house, any railway network, and any national border we have ever known. Yet, they may completely disappear within our own lifetime. So, who is truly paying the price for this perfection? The farmer pays with relentlessly long days. The renter pays with exorbitant living costs. The immigrant pays with the long wait to finally belong. The community pays by sacrificing a portion of personal convenience. Nature pays with its space and its integrity, and the future generations may have to pay all the rest. Perhaps perfection was never a permanent state to be achieved just once. It is a fragile agreement that must be carefully rewritten every single day. A heavy hand quietly locks the barn door for the night. Down in the valley, the last commuter train glides perfectly through the fading light. Warm lights flicker on inside countless rented apartments. The rhythmic sound of the cowbells slowly fades into the dark, while high above, water continues to quietly drip from the ancient glacier. Switzerland does not work because everyone is exactly the same, or because nature is endlessly generous. It works because millions of people actively accept waiting their turn. They share their confined spaces, deeply respect each other's time, perform the unseen, grueling work, and constantly negotiate when their interests do not align. In a modern world where we increasingly have more private space but fewer places to truly belong, is a good life measured by what we individually own or by what we are still willing to share and protect together? And for you, what makes a place truly become a community?